Low FODMAPers. It's Megan Marie from woodyandmarie.com, and we're finally back after I think a year of being off, only because we had a baby. The pregnancy was a little bit difficult for me just because I had all of these food aversions and I pretty much had morning sickness, which really lasted all day long. I didn't really feel like filming stuff about food with all of that going on. So we did take some time off and then had the baby, and of course, if you have kids, it is a shock to your normal routine. So definitely had the time that I was off from maternity leave, I took off from Woody and Marie as well. So back now and starting to film again, hopefully more regularly. If he's asleep, then it's easier to film for us, which is what he's doing right now. He's sleeping. But yeah, so hopefully we're back on a more steady cadence, but being new to parenthood, who knows? Once he starts getting on the move, I don't know what we're gonna do. So trying to film as much as we can now while he is still bound to, you know, his crib and his swing and things like that. I really wanted to film some of the things that I had listed out before I had to stop because of the pregnancy, and so one of those things was to make a banana pudding. I made one a couple years ago just to experiment with it, and it didn't go great. And I know what you're thinking. It's like, okay, banana pudding, the first thing you think of is a ton of gluten, a ton of dairy, but there's definitely ways to make this low FODMAP. You have to really find the right ingredients, and sometimes they're a little hard to come by, but we'll talk through that. And then putting it together is really simple. If you've ever made banana pudding, at least like what I think of as like the classic version from my childhood, what my mom used to make was like the no-bake, very easy banana pudding that you just kind of layer together. I know sometimes when we would go to church and we had potlucks, we would have these really like fancy banana puddings that were baked that I always thought tasted really weird, but who knows? I have very basic tastes sometimes because you crave what you grew up with, right? And this is a very basic dessert. So let's talk through some of the ingredients and then we'll get into how to make a banana pudding low FODMAP. So let's first talk about the Nilla wafers that you usually just grab off the shelf because they're everywhere, but they're full of gluten. I love these cookies. They're called Kinnikinnick Vanilla Wafers, which is such a fun name. It sounds Canadian, but I actually, oh, they're made in Canada. Ha, that's hilarious. Yeah, so they are gluten-free. They're actually free from soy, gluten, nuts, dairy, and yeah, they're delicious. They taste just like Nilla wafers. So I really like them. The boxes are a little small. So I think a typical box of Nilla wafers is just slightly bigger. This is actually 6 ounces. So I usually try to get 2 or 3 boxes of these. Sometimes they can be kind of hard to find. I've found them on Amazon before. Walmart also has them and will ship them to you as well. Now let's talk about the pudding. I always get the Jello pudding. And I made the mistake of getting banana flavor one time because I thought it's banana pudding, so don't you want to have that banana flavor, but it's a very artificial banana flavor. At least I don't like it, so I always use vanilla, and I'm pretty sure that's what's usually used in a lot of these recipes. You're already putting bananas into your banana pudding, so there's absolutely no need to actually use banana flavored pudding. So I get 1 or 2 of these depending on how much pudding you want, but this is 3.4 ounces, so it's just a small box. And you would think that there's dairy in here, but there's no dairy. Actually, the dairy is what you would add in, so it calls for milk. But instead, we're going to use almond milk. When you're using a dairy-free milk, you have to be careful because the ratios are slightly different. This calls for 2 cups of milk. You'll definitely want to use fresh, like cold, dairy-free milk for this. But I think I only use like 1.5 cups. I could have probably gotten away with just using 1 cup to make it thicker. So that's why you might want to get a couple boxes if you like thick pudding layers, because you're losing some of the volume because you're not using as much milk in the recipe. And lastly, you have to have whipped topping. And this one is the hardest for me to find. So I went with True Whip Original Whip Topping. And this is found in the frozen aisle of a lot of stores. I think you can probably find it almost anywhere. Now, this typically does have dairy in it, and this actually I think does have a little bit of milk product in it. It lists light cream, but it's less than 2%. So in the Spoonful app, I looked it up, and for this specific one, True Whip Regular All Natural Frozen Whipped Topping is likely low FODMAP at 1 serving. So you can try that and see if it works for you or not. But so far, it's been great for me. It doesn't have any high fructose corn syrup in it, which is what you see in a lot of the other whipped toppings. So I know one of the suggestions online that I saw, I think in the Spoonful app as well, was to use a sugar-free whipped topping because it didn't have the high fructose corn syrup. And that would have been my preference. However, the store didn't have it. I'm sure they don't sell a lot of the sugar-free whipped topping, because when you're baking something with whipped topping, it is usually going to be a dessert and you want to have that sugar content. I don't know what that would taste like in a banana pudding anyway. Probably not too bad. I mean, it's whipped topping. I don't know that it's gonna, like, you have so much other sugary elements in this dessert that it probably wouldn't be bad, but I haven't tried it. So if you can, try to get one that does have sugar in it. Now, Ready Whip does make a dairy-free version of their whipped topping. I think I had to get it through Amazon Fresh, which I can't even get here at this location. But when we used to live in a bigger city, we could get it from the Whole Foods. So we did that. However, I don't think they come in tubs. I can only get it in the spray cans, and you need several of those to actually get the amount of whipped topping that you need for a banana pudding. So like I mentioned earlier, I made this 2 years ago and didn't go so well, and that was because I was using that spray can whipped topping, and I think I had 2 of them, and it just wasn't enough. They run out really quickly, but it is dairy free. So, I mean, that's an alternative. If you can't find something in a tub, then you can definitely go with that. It also, it's a different consistency because, you know, this is frozen and you kind of thaw it out, but the Ready Whip is already, you know, it's very aerated because it's coming out of that spray can. So just a little bit of different consistency there, but again, shouldn't affect the taste. And really, when you make banana pudding, all of those layers and things kind of come together anyway and combine. So you're really eating it all in 1 spoonful. And I will just quickly mention that for your bananas, make sure, and I know you probably already know this if you've been on the low FODMAP diet for a while, and I know I preach this in all of my videos, but make sure that your bananas are not too ripe. They need to be just like turning from green to yellow, or right before they start getting like brown spots on them, they should still be okay.
Measure out 1.5 cups of cold almond milk. The pudding package will call for 2 cups of milk, but because we're not using full fat milk, we need to use less so it's not runny. Pour 1 3.4 ounce package of vanilla pudding into a large bowl. Combine the milk and pudding powder, adding the milk gradually as you whisk for 2 minutes or until it's thick. It's not going to get super thick, but at least whisk it until you've hit the 2-minute mark. And then we can put that in the fridge until we're ready to use it later. Let's speed this up a little bit. I'll spare you the full 2 minutes and we'll cut to something else. In the fridge this goes, and then we'll start chopping up our bananas. Make sure you have low FODMAP yellow bananas, no brown spots. So now we're ready to add our whipped topping. Now I should have mentioned this in the beginning of the video, but before you even start, you need to move your whipped topping from the freezer to the fridge to thaw out. Ideally, you want to do this the night before, but if you're like me, you'll forget and set it on the counter to defrost while you do everything else. And then set the other half aside. Grab a bowl that you're going to use to actually assemble your banana pudding in. And we're going to start out by adding a layer of those gluten-free vanilla wafers. We're using a 6.3 ounce box of Knick vanilla wafers. Now note how many wafers you use for the first layer and then set that same amount aside to use as the final topping. So we're going to start by adding this layer of wafers, and then on top of that we're going to add a layer of pudding. Because our pudding isn't very thick, we're not going to get those very defined layers, but it doesn't matter because it will all mix together anyway. So now let's add our layer of bananas, and then we'll repeat the process of layering. First the wafers, then the pudding, then the bananas. Wafers, pudding, bananas, until you realize you didn't cut up enough bananas and you cut up a third one. So we'll correct that in the final recipe on the website. And when you're finally out of bananas and pudding, we're going to add a layer of that whipped topping to the very top. And then grab the wafers that you set aside and either add them around the top whole, or you can do what I did and hammer the crap out of them and make them all crumbly. And then we'll sprinkle that on top, and you can either serve this immediately or refrigerate it until you're ready to eat. You can find this recipe and many more on woodyandmarie.com.